Well, this thing's pretty gross. It does turn. Good. So to start off with, I ended up using a card scraper. You can use sandpaper or really anything else, but I've never used a card scraper before, so I wanted to give it a shot, and it gave it a nice finish and whatnot. I don't know whether it did anything that sandpaper wouldn't have been able to easily accomplish, and I ended up using sandpaper on the brace near the end, that circle on the left. But after I'm done scraping down the handle, I end up taking sandpaper like I did with the saws and whatnot. I end up taking sandpaper and mineral spirits and really just go to town on it. So it quickly cleaned up, but I didn't like the overall shine that I was able to produce with the sandpaper. So I ended up, or with the flat sandpaper. So I ended up changing things up a little bit. I bought just a regular belt. I bought belt sander sandpaper. I ended up cutting them both into strips and using the belt as a support for the sandpaper to prevent me from just ripping that sandpaper by putting the force onto it. And I basically just did it like I've seen shoe shiners do. Now, I didn't know a good way of holding the work. So, and I left it here just to show, I don't, this is all new to me just as it's new to you all. So I wanted to make sure I showed, listen, I've made a really terrible idea at the very beginning by trying to hold it by that center wooden handhold. So I go through this using the belt and belt sander paper, and I love the results. It turned out looking a lot better, and just taking material off a lot cleaner and quicker. You can tell right there that the bottom was a lot cleaner than the top. So I go through and I continue working the piece with, um, I believe 80 grit, and just sand away at it. So here you can really tell, especially when I turn the wheel, the kind of material that sandpaper setup is able to remove. You can tell one side is incredibly shiny, looks really nice, and the other sides are grimy and disgusting. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually holding that wheel with my knee as I'm going around and sanding the uh, rest of the bearing. So from here, I ended up switching up to a much higher grit. I think it was 180 grit sandpaper to help give a little bit of shine to it. And I finally found a way that I'm able to hold that in the work vise, and it's actually hold without using really anything else besides just the workmate there. But I got it cleaned up and polished up a bit. Now, I could have gone over with a higher grit sandpaper, but honestly, this is a work tool. It's going to be a work tool. I don't need anything that's I'm looking to resell or anything like that. I just want something that feels clean in my hand. So I go through it and polish it up with the higher grit. That belt and belt sander sandpaper worked really well. It really helped prevent that sandpaper from splitting because I was putting a lot of pressure on it. Now here, I just used boiled linseed oil again. Um, Rub it down on the top and the middle piece of wood, and I cover the whole thing with furniture wax, just to prevent it from rusting further. Now, one thing that unfortunately the video cut, and I wasn't able to give you the full shot, is I put that top mouth and cylinder into rust removal, and I ended up just soaking that overnight and in a rust removal solution and using my brother's toothbrush to get that cleared off because there's just too many little holes and whatnot that wouldn't have been able to get with sandpaper easily. The inside of it would have been difficult to get with sandpaper, so I ended up soaking that entire top half in the rust removal solution, which I use Evapo-Rust.